welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Stuart.
And I'm Simon.
We've been finding, buying and creating income from investment properties for over 20 years, and we talk every week about the reality of running our property businesses. And as part of that, we try and give as much value as we can to you, the listener, and those that are viewing, because we're putting this on video now. And as part of that value that we give to you, we've never asked for anything. We've done over 200 episodes. All we ask is that you please leave a rating or review on your player of choice. That would be amazing. That's all we ask for. Now, today's topic, as you will have seen in the title, is why we hate the term landlords. And just to be clear, we're not just going to get up on soapboxes about this, maybe a little, but there are some good reasons from our perspective about why we don't like the term landlord. But Simon, we had a very initial chat about this, and you did agree as well that you're not keen on the landlord, but we have different reasons for disliking it. What's one of yours?
So I think probably the most well-known sort of thing against the term landlord would be the fact that it's really sort of vilified a lot these days by the press and the population and the political landscape that we're currently in. And I think that just creates a sort of bad feeling around the word landlord or the name landlord. And that is extended towards all individuals who are landlords. And that's not, it just doesn't create a good environment for doing business in. And I think it's just unnecessary, really. I don't think people who are landlords should be vilified in that way. I mean, yes, obviously you get some bad landlords, but the large majority of people who are looking after property and providing homes for people are perfectly good, nice people.
Yeah, so there's negative connotations, and it is frustrating because there's negative connotations in every industry, every sector. But I think it's propagated by whoever the political party is in at the time, because they know it's a quick win, isn't it, to vilify the landlord, and so you can feel a little bit grubby. But then we know the truth. We know that 95% of us are out there doing our best for the tenants, trying to repair things as quickly as we can. So that is definitely one of the first reasons that we don't like that term.
It is, yeah. And I think I saw a stat, there's 11 million tenants or something like that at the moment in the UK. I could have that number wrong, and it might not be in the UK, but anyway, approximately. And I mean, that's a lot of people for politicians to try and appeal to, and a lot of people for the press to try and appeal to. And yeah, I think we as landlords, as people providing homes, are just too easy a target, because when you're renting a home, of course your landlord is taking all this money from you. But yes, it's too easily done, and I think really not helpful for anybody in actual fact. I don't think it helps the tenants to feel that their landlord is a terrible person. But my approach to this word is very different from yours, Stuart. So what was your initial dislike for this term?
The first reason actually that I personally dislike it, because I think it limits the scope and vision of what it is we as people in property are trying to do. I am going to come on to talking about the difference between a landlord and a property investor, in my mind, at least. But the first thing, the reason I myself am not keen on landlord, because I think it gets us focusing on just a property. Because I think about a landlord, and I think it's a landlord of a property. And when I say landlord, I'm obviously including men and women and everything in between, the landlord of a property. But I just feel like it reduces the vision. And what I also feel like when we think about that is that as soon as I'm a landlord of a property, that means I am responsible for all those things in the property, and takes my mind immediately to all of those visions of sticking my arm down the toilet, trying to clear the U-bend, painting walls magnolia, and all of a sudden I have a very different vision of what my role is in relation to a property investment?
I think you're thinking about it all wrong. Because a landlord is, of course, the sort of master of a manor and their vast estate on which there are many properties that they rent out to many poor and unfortunate people. And yes, you definitely wouldn't catch them putting their arm down a toilet to clear anything. And you see, you've got it all wrong. So that's what you should be thinking of when you think of landlord. Is a very wealthy person who sits up in a very nice, comfortable manner and looks out and surveys the land from horizon to horizon. That's all theirs.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not there yet, and I don't think you are either. So we've got a long way before we put on our smoking jackets and
Yeah, just
get
a
the
little
cigars
bit.
out. But so I think there's something in that where we could argue that this is just semantics, and in many ways it is. But for me, it's quite important because I'm just going to flip it. So what do I think about? I think about property investor. I think I've always thought of myself as an investor. And when I think about what is an investor, in its simplest form, an investor is a seeker of profits. And for me, that is why I got into property, because of all the things that we know and love, and we'll talk about in the future, and we've talked about in the past, which is the double whammy of capital appreciation as well as income stroke cash flow, if you've done it right. But if I think about landlord, I'm not thinking that strategically. So for me, if I flip it and say I'm a property investor, and I might just say that to myself, or a property entrepreneur, whatever language you want, immediately my mind is opened up to more possibilities than just climbing up a ladder and emptying the gutter from that week. And so for me, landlord is quite a limiting thing. Whereas if I think about my property as a property investor, I'm already getting myself into more of a business mindset. What do you think about that?
I can see what you mean, and I think I think if you're an investor, as you say, I think that sort of detaches you a bit from the property, and I'm not convinced that that's actually a good thing. I think it is quite important for an investor in a property business to actually feel quite attached to the property, and maybe you're not sort of wanting to be, I don't know, painting walls or whatever it is. You may not want the hands-on involvement, but I think you should be sort of aware of the property and know your properties and know them sort of inside out, really, know them well, in order to have a good sort of grasp on what needs to be done and what maintenance there is and how you can best serve that property and your tenants in those properties, even though you're not sort of hands-on. And I don't think that the term landlord really has to embody sort of being there in person and doing the work. But it does have that more direct link with the property. Whereas investor, I feel it sort of makes that a lot more remote. And while I can see your point of view from it being for building a business, I'm not sure it's, yeah, I don't know. It does feel a bit remote for me. So I'm with you. I don't like the term landlord, but I'm not sure that I would just want to be referred to as an investor instead of landlord. I'm yet to arrive at what my replacement word is for landlord.
I think about this very differently, and it's quite interesting. And this is an interesting conversation because I don't want to become attached to the properties, and I don't want to get close to the properties. And I think there's an interesting point here. Number one, as anyone that's listened to this before will know, my properties are over 200 miles away, so I'm not as close to them geographically.
Yeah, that's quite a journey.
as many would be. But then I also think so again, I'm not saying necessarily, for me it doesn't matter what other people call me. I don't mind if they call me a landlord or an investor. But I think where I wanted to get to is to scale a business that would sustain my family and my lifestyle. And to be really clear, we're not there yet. We've still got a way to go, even though the business has scaled quite high. And we've talked about it before, but the business is a high six figures now in terms of revenue. So we are multiple six figures. I'll just say that for now. And I may share more about that in the future and go into a deeper dive of what that currently looks like. But right now, that's not it. But it's multiple six figure rental role, which is where I wanted to get to. And so I immediately think about, in terms of your point about knowing properties, I think if I were the CEO of a large organization, let's say Coca-Cola, how close am I to certain elements of that business? How close am I to what's happening? Do I know that the stockroom is fully stocked with A4 90 GSM photocopier paper?
Probably not, but you probably will have visited a factory. You will probably visit factories frequently. You will probably know how your factories produce your product and where the bottles come from and what they're made of and how they progress through the factory and get filled, and obviously how the actual product, the drink, is actually
so you know the
created.
process. So you know the
Exactly.
process,
and I'm sure you do get hands-on enough to visit and see and talk to the people involved and things. So
absolutely.
there is a connection there, even from right at the top.
Absolutely, but they're not sweeping the shop floor, are they?
No, and I agreed with you on that point. I don't think you should feel you need to be the person holding the paintbrush or the plunger, but you should be aware that those things are sometimes needed.
So we're actually in violent agreement. But my point is there's a difference between the CEO, the chief executive officer, and the window cleaner or the cleaner or the canteen person. And all of those things have different titles. And so how I think about myself is more the CEO of the business, because I completely agree. And this is why this is a really good and interesting conversation, at least for me, because I completely agree. And I want to speak. So I do go to some properties and speak with tenants because I need to know what the bugbears are. However, for the day to day, that's outsourced to letting agents, for example. And we'll still get that feedback. And the feedback will be maintenance needs to happen quicker. Why? Because if it doesn't, people get upset and they move out. Equally, I want to understand, what do they like? We might want to put in a coffee machine, or in some cases we might have put a large screen and a gaming unit in there, but no one goes into that room for whatever reason. And actually understanding what our tenants want is the business of someone that is trying to grow and scale a business. Because if you don't understand your customer, and tenants are our customers, then you don't have a business. So I completely agree. And I know that the best CEOs or the best business owners in the world are those that are walking up and down the production line, understanding what their staff are saying about the production itself and what's going on, as well as speaking directly with their consumers stroke customers to understand what it is they do or don't like. However, they have to think, as the business owner, a lot more strategically. They're not going to think, well, how many times do I need to sweep this floor a week, or how many times? They're thinking about, what is it that we need to do to get to where we need to go? And I think that is a lot more of the job of the business owner stroke property investor than as someone who is just a landlord. And that is why my mind very much dislikes the word landlord. And yeah, other people might call me a landlord. It doesn't bother me, but I find it quite limiting for myself, which is why I don't refer to myself as often as a landlord, unless it's just someone that I think would just understand that much easier than if I say I'm a property business owner. I actually say to most people when I introduce myself, I invest in property, because I am an investor. It just happens in property, but actually we're investors in other things as well as property.
And I think, so you are an investor in property, but a lot of your property business is actually not investment per se, because a lot of your property business is rent to rent. And while you do put capital into that, it's a lot less capital, and it's not really investing in an asset that you get to keep and hold. So I would actually even question investor for some property businesses. I mean, yours is sort of half and half. It's not half and half, but I mean, it's a split. But there are property businesses out there that are all rent to rent, for example, or other strategies. And for those, perhaps investor is not even the right term, but they are acting as a landlord in the general sense, but they're not acting as an investor. But they presumably are a business owner and perhaps have the role of CEO or that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's a bit tricky to necessarily use investor as an alternative. And another sort of point of view on that is, of course, when you're talking to tenants, what should they call you? I think from my stance, being called a landlord is not particularly good these days. But I wouldn't expect my tenant to call me an investor or even the business owner or anything. Yeah, any ideas?
Well, from my perspective, again, it's very different depending on what you're trying to do. So, what am I officially? I'm a managing director of a business. It just so happens that business is in property and the renting of property. Where those properties come from is, in many ways, it's a key part of the business. Don't get me wrong, but in many ways, is unimportant in terms of the operations of the business. The operations of the business, and that is what I'm a managing director of, is essentially the same thing. It's putting people on beds in buildings. Is essentially, if I want to boil it down, it. If we're talking about what other people call you, I mean,
yeah, maybe we shouldn't go there. I don't
know. That's a different topic for probably maybe a late night show that we're not going to do. But yeah, but for me, it's really just bringing it back to that, and talking to those listening and hopefully watching, is that it's really about how you see yourself. My view is, if you want to build something substantial, we need to think about what we are in relation to doing that. So for me, like I say, when I built a business, any business owner, and I've seen a lot of people call, they'll call themselves founders. And I know there is a little bit of a, we wince a little bit, if someone says I'm an entrepreneur or a founder in property. And I don't know why that is. I think just because of all of the information and the negativity that can surround property, we're a bit more reticent to say that. But essentially, if you're starting a business and it's a commercially profitable business, essentially you're a business owner, and then you're whatever you want to be. And that is the power of doing what we do. I know that my rationale for doing this was because I wanted to create the income that would give me the choice to be where I wanted and do what I wanted when I wanted to do it, rather than and it just so happens, I used the word founder when I first started Lord Panda Property several years ago. And I spoke to a friend who started a very big business now, actually in the recruitment space. And he said, the only problem with founder is that most people don't know what that means you do in relation to the business. Whereas a managing director is very clear. So if you're going out and talking to people, and it's funny because I wouldn't, if I was introduced to someone today, I wouldn't say I'm the managing director, because, and I think it's a very British thing in my head. Well, I'm the managing director of my own company, but I now have an employee. We have a business, like I say, which is generating a high 6-figure turnover. So actually, it's a business. I am the managing director, and this conversation may well have just pushed me into saying, yeah, okay, that's what we are, and let's just get on with it. But I'm not a landlord to myself. It's just I'm running a business.
Yeah, I'm in a harder situation because I have a property limited company, which is a business, and of that I am, I guess, the managing director. However, the majority of my portfolio is owned in personal name. It's owned in my personal name, obviously, and
hope so.
yeah, it's not a fraudulent portfolio. And obviously there is no company structure there. There's no managing director for that. So I guess I have to be a landlord or an investor in that side of things and that part of the business. And I'm not convinced I particularly like either of those terms for being referred to externally. So yes, yeah.
But on that point, I don't think it matters what you're related to externally, because I think this is really good. It's really just defined, because there are multiple types of investor, property investor, but actually the one you've just outlined, in my mind at least, is more the private investor, because you have another business, a software business, which you are the owner, the founder, and the managing director of, and that is your business. Whereas property is separate to that, and like you say, in personal name. So I feel like that's quite different to what where I'm coming from. But even in that situation, I would still think about myself as, well, I'm a property investor, but externally, am I a landlord? Yeah, I am. That's what we are. Although, again, still interesting topic for us at least. But I have a property which is the studio flat, which we rent out on serviced accommodation. I am a landlord, but now that's serviced accommodation. Am I a landlord? Am I a?
Yeah, I think you're a service provider at that
service
point, aren't
provider?
You? So it's different again. Yeah, I think perhaps as we discuss this, I think I'm sort of coming to a conclusion that I have to be called a landlord, even though I don't like it. And maybe what we need to work on is a mass campaign of rebranding or refocusing the meaning of landlord. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to put a call out to everyone listening. Let us know. show@thebusinessproperty.com. Is landlord a good name? If it's not, what would you rather people called you? And if you have to settle for landlord, how can we fix it?
Yeah, and as we wrap up, I'll just reiterate that it'll be great to hear any feedback, comments wherever you're listening, or show at the Biz of Property on Twitter. And the only thing I would say, I've got that wrong. Simon's just given it out. Look us up at Twitter. You can find us, the Biz of Property, Biz of Property. The one thing I would say is that there's a guy called Ben Beadle, and anyone that's in property may have heard of him. Ben Beadle works for the NRLA, which I think is National Residential Landlords Association. I believe he's doing a very good job of really trying to rebalance the efforts of people that have property in the market that they're renting to general public and residential, because saying that we do provide a really good service. That wasn't the topic of this conversation, so we didn't go there today. But I do believe Ben Beadle is really, he's had meetings with the government, with a number of members of parliament there to really talk about, Michael Gove, in terms of, the service that we provide. And actually, if we keep getting vilified and taking property off the market because of all of the restrictions, actually, you're not helping people. You're actually making things worse. But that is a different topic altogether. We do hope you've enjoyed this episode. Certainly know that we have. And as always, please do leave us a review wherever you're listening. And feel free to comment wherever you are listening or watching. And we'll see you next week.